Pontiac 6000. During the 1980s, General Motors invested heavily in its line of mid-size models. They produced modern engines, smaller displacements, front-wheel drives, and aerodynamic bodies. And one such car was the Pontiac 6000. Pontiac fans were familiar with Pontiac model names that meant something. However, the 6000 was a number that didn't mean anything except that it marked a new approach for Pontiac. They offered the 6000 in a 2- or 4-door sedan and wagon. Pontiac built it on the front-wheel drive platform with new 4- and 6-cylinder engines. Interestingly, Pontiac even offered a diesel unit in the 6000. They presented it in 1981 as a 1982 model, and the 6000 received a warm welcome from the motoring press as well as the consumers. So in 1984, Pontiac offered a 6000 STE version, which was sportier and more dynamic than the regular model. With a 2.8-liter V6 engine producing 135 horsepower, the 6000 STE didn't provide much in terms of performance by today's standards, but in 1984 it was a relatively hot model. However, they stopped producing the 6000 in 1991. So today most fans have never heard of it except for the fans of obscure models. Pontiac CanAm. Back in the late 1970s, the American performance car segment was just a pale shadow of its former glory. The ecological and safety standards killed high-compression engines and performance to where it was just a word in magazine ads. In 1977, Pontiac introduced the Can-Am, a one-year-only model that was the last true muscle car. It had as much big block power as it could produce, with a unique body style and fresh white color. Under the hood scoop from the Pontiac Trans Am, there was a big 455 engine with 200 horsepower. That was more than any other muscle car on the market at the moment. The Can-Am package consisted of special rear window louvers, a rear spoiler, and a long list of special optional extras. They introduced this car in early 1977, and the market responded well. In fact, Pontiac received between 5,000 and 10,000 reservations. But in the end, they only sold 1,377 Can-Ams. The main reason for its demise was because a small outside contractor assembled the Can-Am. The company suffered equipment failure, so they needed to wait 3 months for a replacement. Pontiac decided that was too long, so Pontiac canceled all open orders. This killed the Can-Am because they didn't produce the model for 1978. Pontiac Catalina 2+2. In the mid-60s, the Pontiac GTO was the car to have since it was at the forefront of the exciting new muscle car movement. With its performance, powerful engine, and great Pontiac styling, the GTO was the perfect car for the moment. But it wasn't the only stellar performance machine coming from Pontiac. In 1965, there was another pure muscle car icon in form of the Catalina 2+2. Behind this strange name hides a full-size Catalina model, and it's available as a coupe or a convertible with a performance twist. The regular Catalina was a great-looking and decent-selling model, but in 2+2 form, it transformed into a true Gran Turismo with a luxury interior and fire-breathing engine. And since the Catalina was a full-size model, it was eligible for engines over 400 cubic inch, according to GM rules of the time. This meant that the Catalina 2+2 came with the famous 421 V8, and if you wanted, you could get a tri-power intake system, the same as on the GTO, and that boosted your car's power to 376 horsepower. Car buyers could also order limited slip differentials, heavy-duty steering, brakes, and more. This made the Catalina 2+2 well-appointed but unfortunately expensive, too. However, a top-of-the-line 2+2 cost over $4,000, which was a hefty sum. It was much more than the similarly equipped GTO, for example. This meant Pontiac soon discontinued the Catalina 2+2, and eventually people forgot about them. Pontiac Bowmont. The Bowmont Pontiacs are an interesting story not many people know about. In the early 60s, General Motors decided to introduce a special brand just for the Canadian market, and they called it the Acadian. It featured many options like most regular GM models, but with a few design tweaks and different names. So in the mid-60s, Pontiac dropped the Acadian name and renamed it the Bowmont, and they sold these vehicles in Pontiac Buick dealerships across Canada. They featured Chevrolet body styles with different front ends, but with a logo that looked like Pontiac. Soon, the car became as famous as the Pontiac Bowmont, and the name stuck despite not being an official designation. So most Bowmonts used the Chevelle body style with a different grille and headlights. Best of all, the Bowmont buyers got higher equipment levels and the 427 engines that were unavailable north of the U.S. border. Pontiac Banshee 1. In the early 60s, most people considered Pontiac a performance brand, and with the newly introduced GTO model, the muscle car and performance markets were booming. However, the management of the company had bigger ambitions. So they soon introduced a fully operational concept vehicle they called the Banshee. The Banshee 1 was the first in a long line of Pontiac concept cars that had an influence on production models, and the first one to emerge in 1964 was extremely advanced with compact dimensions, a lightweight body, and a powerful engine. Pontiac conceived it as a Mustang killer, but GM was afraid that a sports coupe from Pontiac could affect their Corvette sales, so they canceled the project. However, most car fans think that's too bad since the Banshee 1 had the potential to be a fantastic car. GM even incorporated several of its design clues into the next-generation Corvette. Today, both prototypes have survived, one silver coupe and one white convertible. Pontiac Farago CF428. This fantastic and totally obscure Pontiac is a concept from the late 60s. They made it at a specific request by the then head of the company, John Z. DeLorean, and Italian carrosserie Coggiola built it while ex-Chrysler designer Paul Farago designed it. So they officially introduced the car in 1968 to represent the future design of Pontiac's luxury coupes. Under the hood was the mighty 428 V8 engine. Also, the car used a modified Grand Prix frame with the dashboard and instruments from the same models. Also, some interesting features were the experimental light alloy wheels and prototype Firestone LXX tires. And although the Farago was a fully operational car they featured in many car shows, people have forgotten it since. Pontiac Elcatalina. In 1960, Pontiac wanted to expand its portfolio. They even thought of producing some sort of light delivery vehicle or truck. However, the closest thing GM had at that point was the popular and usable Chevrolet El Camino. They based it on a full-size Chevy car platform. So Pontiac's R&D department took the El Camino and mounted it on their own 1960 Catalina body. Also, they chopped and reshaped it with the El Camino rear glass and truck bed, and they called the finished concept the Elcatalina, and it was arguably more beautiful and elegant than the El Camino. Although GM didn't have anything against the project, Pontiac decided it wasn't worth the investment. They felt that the market was too small, so they didn't want to gamble. Pontiac Banshee 4. The 1988 Banshee was the fourth concept car to carry that name. Also, it was the first to directly influence production cars afterward. In fact, most of the design elements of the 1988 Banshee appeared several years later on the 1993 Pontiac Firebird. However, this concept car was much more than a design study for the fourth-generation F-body. It was the vision of Pontiac's sports car future. The car came with a 4.0-liter all-aluminum V8 that sent all 230 horsepower to the rear wheels over a 5-speed manual gearbox, and its suspension was fully independent with adjustable dampers. They made the body out of lightweight materials with a superb aerodynamic coefficient. And lastly, the Banshee was closer to Ferrari than to a muscle car. 1938 Pontiac 8 Sport Coupe. During the early period of Pontiac as a brand, they shared the economy market with Chevrolet. However, they still managed to introduce some interesting models, and one of those was the 8 Sport Coupe from 1938. It featured a straight 8 engine, a sleek body, and delivered a respectable performance for the day. Under the long hood was a 222 cubic inch 8-cylinder engine with 100 horsepower, and it could propel the elegant 2-door Sport Coupe to 90-mile-per-hour top speeds. Pontiac Parisianne. The Parisianne model is relatively well known as a trim level on the U.S.-built Pontiac from the early 80s onwards, but you probably didn't know about the Parisianne models they built for the Canadian market in 1959 and 1960. Those cars looked similar to the U.S.-built Pontiac Catalina. However, they featured different trims and equipment. They used the Parisianne nameplate not only for the Pontiacs they sold in Canada, but also for the entry-level sedans they sold in Europe. That was because GM thought the Parisianne name would attract European customers. Pontiac Trans Am 20th Anniversary Turbo. In 1989, Pontiac was busy celebrating the 20th anniversary of its favorite muscle car, the Trans Am. And what was a better way than to introduce a limited run of 1,500 cars to commemorate the occasion? But the anniversary editions had to have a twist and not be just another decal and paint job. So Pontiac decided to install a Buick 3.8-liter turbo V6 from the GNX to create the fastest Trans Am of the decade. The white commemorative edition could accelerate 0.1 seconds faster from 0 to 60 miles per hour than the GNX at 4.6 seconds. The reason was simple. It had a better weight distribution and gearing from a Pontiac gearbox. Although true Pontiac aficionados still remember this car, the general automotive public has forgotten about it. You will see many Pontiacs on the roads today. However, the models on this list are the ones people forgot for whatever reason. Although these cars made history, unfortunately, they weren't enough to save the Pontiac Car Company.